What if I told you the world you live in was designed by people who died centuries ago? What if every border, every war, and every alliance today was shaped by Europe's old ambitions? And what if the past isn't gone, but is still pulling the strings of our future? Imagine waking up in a world designed long before you were born, a world where the continents were reorganized, cultures transformed, and nations scripted by decisions made in royal courts, war rooms, and colonial capitals. A world where the past did not simply fade into history but continues to control the present. This is the world we live in today, and to understand its cracks, conflicts, and connections, we must look back not decades, but centuries to the moment Europe rewrote the global map, because Europe didn't just explore the world. It rearranged it. Picture a map of the world. Now imagine someone, long ago, taking a pen and drawing lines across continents they had never lived in. Lines that cut through tribes, languages, and ancient cultures. They weren't thinking about the people who called those lands home. They were thinking about resources, trade routes, and power. Those straight borders across Africa, the carved-up territories of the Middle East, the restructured kingdoms of Asia, they were decisions made in European capitals. And today, millions live inside those decisions. Travel farther back, to the moment when European ships set sail to places they had only heard whispers of. These voyages weren't just explorations. They were the beginning of a global redesign. They created new cities, erased old ones, shifted populations, destroyed kingdoms, and built new societies on the ashes of the old. The languages spoken today in South America, in parts of Africa, in islands across the Pacific, they echo those footsteps. Each word spoken today carries a piece of Europe's past. But Europe's influence wasn't only carried by soldiers and sailors. Ideas traveled to ideas about governance, religion, law, trade, and revolution. Some became the foundation of democracy. Others ignited wars, uprisings, and cultural transformations. These ideas stitched themselves into the fabric of nations, shaping how people lived, believed, fought, and dreamed. But this is not just a story about colonization. It is a story of revolutions that sparked modern democracy, wars that redrew continents, and treaties that created superpowers while shattering nations. And ideas both inspiring and destructive that spread across the world like wildfire. Even the global economy, the systems of banking, taxation, and international trade was engineered through European competition and cooperation. Rival empires created structures that still decide how wealth flows across continents. A country today may build its entire economic fate on decisions forged during colonial trade wars long before it ever had the power to choose for itself. Today, the European Union influences global economics. NATO shapes military policies. The United Nations, the World Bank, and the IMF, institutions largely built on Europe's post-war framework, dictate rules for nations thousands of miles away. But these modern structures didn't appear overnight. They grew from the ashes of empire, the ruins of war, and the ambitions of leaders who believed the world could be controlled through dominance, ideology, or negotiation. Imagine sitting in a grand European hall centuries ago, where a handful of powerful figures gathered around polished tables. Their discussions weren't just political meetings. They were moments where the fate of entire continents was decided with ink and ambition. They debated which regions would become trading hubs, which lands would be considered valuable, which cultures would be converted, controlled, or ignored. Every agreement reached, every treaty signed, every rivalry fueled, began a ripple that crossed oceans and centuries, shaping the world far beyond the walls of those halls. Those decisions formed alliances that survive to this day, built not on shared values, but on strategic interests. Forged long before today's leaders were even born, they created rivalries that nations still inherit, tensions passed down like unwelcome legacies. Walk through major world capitals today, and you'll find institutions, legal systems, and administrative structures built on European models. And political frameworks introduced not by their ancestors, but by the ambitions of distant empires. The uniformity of these systems wasn't there an accident. It was intentional, a way to make governing vast territories easier. And long after the empires dissolved, those systems stayed behind, continuing to dictate how justice is delivered, how governments operate, and how economies are organized. Look closer at modern conflicts in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, and you'll find historical fingerprints everywhere. If you look at global powers today, you'll see nations still reacting to choices they never made. Conflicts in the Middle East, tied to borders drawn by European agreements. Tensions in Africa, rooted in colonial favoritism and exploitation. Cultures worldwide are stitched with European threads, some golden, some scarred. Europe's past didn't disappear into history books. It settled quietly into the foundations of today's world and never left. Europe's past didn't only redraw maps, it set off chains of events that still guide the heartbeat of modern diplomacy, economics, and global culture. This is not ancient history. It is the shadow that still looms over today's world. To understand why nations rise and fall, why alliances form and collapse, why conflicts erupt and refuse to die, we must walk back into Europe's past because it still controls our global present. And until we understand that past, we will never truly understand the world we live in. When you look at today's world, its borders, its alliances, its divisions, sure, not seeing modern decisions, you're seeing the long shadow of Europe's past, quietly shaping everything around us. And the truth is, most people walk through life without ever realizing how deeply the choices made centuries ago still control the systems they depend on every single day. But the very rhythm of how nations rise, fall, and interact with one another. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past insightful, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more stories that connect our history to our present. See you in the next video. If you've ever signed an international contract, booked a flight, or even just read a scientific paper, you've participated in a world shaped by a single continent. The languages we use for global business, diplomacy, and technology didn't become dominant by accident. They were spread by European expansion, becoming the world's default bridge languages not because they were superior, but because history pushed them into every corner of the planet. This influence wasn't just about language. Cultural identities that had been celebrated for centuries were altered, blended, or even erased. Look around. In many parts of the world, the architecture, the clothing, the music, and the food still carry the imprint of those who arrived from faraway shores. In other places, a constant struggle is underway to reclaim what was lost. A battle between a nation's own heritage and a history that was imposed upon it. And what about the global economy? The flow of resources, the location of major ports, the dominance of certain nations in trade. These patterns weren't natural. They were designed. They were constructed through centuries of European competition, treaties, and monopolies. Many nations were slotted into economic roles they never chose, roles that continue to impact their development even today. The world market itself was built around European needs, creating lasting imbalances that still help determine who prospers and who struggles. Every interaction between nations today, every alliance, and every dispute carries the fingerprints of choices made in another era. It became a legacy that refuses to fade, a force that still steers the course of nations, even when they believe they're navigating on their own. The structures built during those centuries of expansion grew roots so deep into the foundations of modern society that they still feed into the global systems we all depend on today. Think about how our international organizations came to be. After empires fell, the world needed new frameworks to manage conflict and regulate trade. So, the very institutions that govern our economy, protect global peace, and guide development were born with a European worldview baked in. The rules they follow, the protocols they enforce, the hierarchies they preserve, they all trace back to political philosophies formed during Europe's long dominance. Step into the diplomatic chambers of any major summit today, and you can still feel it. The language is spoken. The negotiation styles, the legal frameworks used to settle disputes, they all reflect a legacy carried forward by nations once shaped by European influence. Countries that were once colonies now stand as sovereign states, yet many still operate using tools, systems, and even borders that were crafted when they had no voice. Their modern identities are often built on foundations they never laid. This imprint is even visible in global culture. Look at the structure of education in many countries, the subjects prioritized, the histories highlighted, the philosophies taught. Students today often learn versions of history that amplify certain narratives while muting others, without realizing that the very balance of what's taught was shaped by decisions made during Europe's imperial age. But this influence isn't just a story of oppression, it's more complex than that. These ideas crossed borders, not just through conquest, but through the contagious power of belief. Conflicts fueled by colonial-era divisions continue to erupt. Economic disparities created by centuries of resource extraction persist. Social tensions rooted in policies enforced long ago still shape communities today. In some regions, the pain of cultural suppression sparks efforts to revive lost traditions and languages. Perhaps the most telling sign of this continuing legacy is how we respond to crises. And even as the world changes, this legacy continues to guide, restrict, inspire, and divide us all. So, when we step back and look at the world not as a collection of separate nations, but as the outcome of centuries of decisions, ambitions, and collisions, one truth becomes clear. Europe's past never really ended. This isn't because the past is powerful on its own. But within this complex inheritance lies an opportunity. By understanding the roots of today's problems, we can learn how to untangle them. By recognizing the origins of global imbalance, we can start to address it. By confronting the echoes of history, we gain the power to write a future that isn't controlled by it. The world we live in was shaped by forces that rose long before us. But the world that comes next will be shaped by those who understand that history, question it, and dare to change its course. Thanks for watching. If this made you think, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world.